Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. He is Tyler Calvaruso, and we've seen quite a few cycles in the transfer portal era for college football now at this point, but certainly nothing like this for the Nittany Lions. This is the first time we've seen a coaching change as part of that process, and the results have kept us very busy at Lions247.com. More than 40 members of the 2025 Nittany Lions roster have moved on via the transfer portal. Many of them are still looking for homes. Some of them have found their next college football landing spot. And then more than 30 incoming Nittany Lions, players who are going to be new pieces of this team. Some will be starters, some will be depth pieces, some we may never actually see in meaningful roles, but this team has a lot to fill out across the practice field before they get into game action. We're seeing that take place right now for Matt Campbell and his coaching staff. And Tyler Calvaruso is on board with us again to break things down. We're going to talk about the latest additions to this transfer portal class since we last spoke with you last Friday. Naturally, there's essentially been a commitment a day, if not more per day. So we've got a bit of a list to go through since we last spoke to you on Friday. And meanwhile, we'll tell you who is leaving Penn State, a couple new names there. There's been some shuffling in the running back room since we last spoke to you. And we'll also get into the freshman class on this episode of the podcast because in recent days, the very first freshman class for Matt Campbell's staff arrived in Happy Valley. It's not a huge group, but it's going to be a significant one as Penn State looks to fill this depth chart and develop toward the future. We will break down all of those early enrolled Nittany Lions in just a little while as they are underway with classes and life on campus. Remember, only 2 of them actually signed with Penn State during that December period before the Nittany Lions had welcomed Matt Campbell as their new coach. So a lot of Iowa State flavor to that class. We'll talk about them all a little bit later on the show. But Tyler, as usual, we'll lead things off with the transfer portal because since the coaching search ended and since that dust kind of settled and we went to the Bronx and covered the Pinstripe Bowl, I'll be honest, we've all kind of lived inside of that transfer portal ever since we came up for air after that Pinstripe Bowl. And it feels like we're still in there, at least for a few more days.
Yeah, up to 35 editions in the portal now. It's been a whirlwind since it opened for business on January 2nd, even before then with all the guys announcing their intentions to enter the portal and then monitoring the Iowa State guys who were monitoring their intent or announcing their intentions to enter the portal. There was a lot of that leading up to the actual opening of the portal on the 2nd. And a lot of those guys who wound up announcing that they were going to be leaving Ames, they've landed in State College and they're going to be playing for Matt Campbell and his staff in 2026 and in some cases 2026 and beyond, depending on which round of eligibility we're talking about. It's been a mix of younger guys with some older guys sprinkled in. A lot of additions beyond the Iowa State realm as well. So there's plenty of us to get into, man. Like you said, it's felt like a commitment a day. Sometimes, they go one day without getting a commitment and everyone's like, what the hell is going on? But nah, it's been very busy. It's been a good kind of busy. It's been very interesting to see the manner in which Campbell and company have gone about building up this 2026 roster.
The pace is at least slowed a little bit for our sanity's sake because when this portal period first started on January 2nd, and even those couple days leading up to January 2nd, when guys were starting to really announce their intentions, it felt like we were getting 8 to 10 Penn State related announcements per day, whether it was guys leaving or Iowa State guys that we knew we needed to have an eye on. There just was so much. Now it's a little bit lighter, but it still is steady. And let's dive right into it because after we got a big barrage of Iowa State transplants on board with this class through that first week, there have been a couple more additions. Obviously, Rocco Becht is the headliner from that initial group. He's on campus. He is projected to be QB1 for this team. He was QB1 for Iowa State the last 3 seasons. We've discussed him quite a bit. There are other starting pieces and potential starting pieces that are coming over from the Cyclones that have a lot of familiarity with this staff. Remember, especially on offense, you're looking at essentially the group that was coaching football in Ames this fall is now coaching football in Happy Valley together again, and they're going to have a lot of those familiar pieces at variety of positions. And Tyler, let's talk about 2 new Iowa State transplants that have joined Penn State's plans and begin with the 3rd tight end to enter the mix. That's Cooper Alexander. We'll talk about the other 2 and we'll circle back to them in just a moment. We've addressed them earlier on in this podcast, earlier in the month, but tell us about Cooper Alexander and this absolute gutting of the Cyclones tight end room that Penn State has accomplished in pretty short order.
He comes over with a pretty good relationship with the offensive coordinator, Taylor Mauser. Those two were tight from stemming from the high school recruitment where Iowa State beat out the likes of Oklahoma. And Alexander's Oklahoma legacy, his father, Steve, played for the Sooners, went on to enjoy a decade-long career in the NFL. I believe he was a Pro Bowler at one point. So that was a big recruiting win for Taylor Mauser and Iowa State. He'll be reuniting with Mauser in State College. 5 catches, 47 yards during his brief career at Iowa State. Battled some injuries. There was a point where Matt Campbell basically said he was on the Benjamin Brahmer path. So that's pretty high praise, I would say, given the fact that Brahmer, who's coming over to Penn State, wasn't all Big 12 tight end. He's a solid pass-catching tight end, solid blocker. There's a lot to like about that addition. He's younger, and I think that's what they needed to go out and do in the portal after landing the 2 veterans in Brahmer and Gabe Berkland, also retaining Andrew Rappleyea and Brian Kordovich. You needed another young guy in the room to supplement things on the depth chart, short-term and long-term. Alexander is that guy. So it's a strong get. I know, again, the production at Iowa State wasn't prolific by any stretch, but he's a young tight end still coming into his own.
And you mentioned Brahmer, a guy who's highly regarded, a lot of accomplishments in the Big 12, projected to essentially be a co-starter. You're going to see a lot of tight end heavy packages. Again, that 12 personnel, Andrew Rappleyea, Brahmer high on that list. But you're also going to see plenty of Burkle, who we discussed earlier this month on the podcast, and you just referenced him. He had close to 30 catches each of the last 2 seasons for Iowa State. So that looks like your top 3, and I think you made a really good point in adding the younger player here who hasn't done as much on the field in Cooper Alexander, but has a pretty good pedigree. You're kind of maybe replacing a Matt Henderson or an Andrew Olish. Both of them have left the program now. They were part of that 2025 freshman class. The only guy left from that 2025 freshman class is Brian Kordovich, who you mentioned before. And of course, Luke Reynolds has moved on from the program as a junior, a guy who started a bunch of games this past year. So we have seen a lot of turnover at the tight end room, and which is under new management. And then over in the defensive backfield, we continue to see an influx of Iowa State players, and perhaps the best yet, you can make a case in Jeremiah Cooper, who has all Big Ten recognition on his resume.
He was a first-team All-Big 12 safety in 2023, honorable mention in 2024, working primarily at cornerback. So you're seeing the positional versatility right there. He's going to get his start at safety at Penn State. And if he can revert to pre-injury Jeremiah Cooper, because he battled an injury throughout 2025, a knee injury that cost him the bulk of the year. And it was unfortunate because he was going to be a big part of that Iowa State secondary, and he was coming off another really strong 2024 campaign. But the expectation is he'll be able to get back to full health with Penn State and be an impactful member of the secondary. Again, he's going to get his start at safety, but this is a player we're talking about here. D'Anton Lynn could plug in a couple different spots, and that's a huge plus. Positional versatility, it's a huge plus, especially in the portal, bringing in a veteran who knows his position coach in Dion Broomfield. Those two are really, really close. He knows this Penn State staff coming over from Iowa State. There's a lot of comfort there for Jeremiah Cooper, and Penn State always felt like the spot for him. It came together over the weekend, maybe a little bit later in the process than some were originally anticipating, but nonetheless, he's on board. It's an impactful get for Penn State. Going to be very interesting to monitor his utilization throughout the year. Again, he looks good at safety. That's where he had his all Big 12 campaign, but if you got to plug him in at cornerback, it's something he can do, and it's something he can do well.
So you say goodbye to the top 4 guys from this room last year. And starters at Wheatley. King Mack was largely the second starter, but you also saw plenty of work for Antoine Belgrave-Shorter, who's now at Arizona State, and for Dejon Lane, who's now at Tennessee. King Mack has moved on to NC State. And so, again, reset button has been hit here in the safety room, kind of like we talked about at tight end. And Cooper comes over now. But we already addressed the fact that they had Jamison Patton on board. Marcus Neal Jr., I know, is one of your favorite gets so far for this recruiting class. Also a guy who's played safety. We'll might as well mention him. West Virginia transfer coming in now, Chris Filippo. He's a Pennsylvania native. He is a safety. We talked about him last week. Omarion Davis, a transfer from Boston College. He is a safety. And so stop me if I'm wrong here, but it feels like they have stockpiled in relatively short period of time a lot of options at that position to fill a 3 deep. That's before we even get to the freshmen who showed up on campus in the last few days and have a chance to impact things there.
Yeah, they have. And Filippo's probably going to drop down, play linebacker when it's all said and done. He's probably going to add some weight, play a little bit of linebacker for Penn State. That's a position change that should go over pretty well. He's a pretty athletic kid. But again, even if he's another one you could plug in a couple different spots because he could cover playing space. So if you need him on the back end, if you need him in the nickel in any capacity, it's something that he showed that he can do during his lone season at West Virginia. So again, versatility, it's been a theme for Penn State in the portal on defense. You've seen a lot of guys who can come in, play different kind of roles for you. So that's a plus. But yeah, it's definitely a stockpiled safety room, retooled safety room, however you want to put it. Amarian Davis from Boston College is a really interesting one because he took his lumps as a true freshman, but I think that's to be expected of any true freshman who's thrust into a bigger than anticipated role on the back end of his secondary. He had some pretty good moments for the Eagles in 2025, and I said it when he first popped on the radar. My understanding is that's a guy Boston College tend to not want to lose to the transfer portal, and Penn State didn't want him to leave campus without committing. That's how much they liked him. They wrapped it up in short order. So Amarian Davis, we spent so much time talking about the Iowa State guys coming over, but I think Amarian Davis is going to have something to say as part of that safety depth chart in 2026 and beyond as well.
He's still a younger guy as a sophomore. And when we talk about the defensive backfield, another name that popped up since we last had a podcast is Ivan McDaniels. Now, he was a name that was discussed on our Friday podcast last week when Daniel Gallen joined us, and you were kind of breaking down the Syracuse defensive back transfer as a real possibility for Penn State. He was spending time on campus. You talked about some of those traits. He is now committed to Penn State. He is part of the 2026 plan at this point. What are they adding at cornerback with Ivan McDaniels out of Syracuse?
Length and athleticism. Those are the main two things. This is a player, some of Penn State staff, Terry Smith, Jordan Lucas, those guys, they were familiar with him because he camped at Penn State during his prep career at Elizabeth High. Didn't leave with an offer, but guys like that, they stick in the back of your mind to some degree. McDaniels.
I remembered him. I mean, I texted you, right? I texted you when I saw that name. I was like, because I essentially remember this dude being like go-go gadget arms and limbs. Like he had the long legs, he had the long arms. I don't necessarily think he was a complete put together cornerback prospect that we thought Penn State had to go target at that point. But a couple years later, with some FBS experience in the ACC, I'm curious about that because length like that at a cornerback position, the way it can impact passing windows, you cannot underrate that trait.
No, you can't. And you're right. He was more of a basketball player at that point, kind of trying to figure out how to develop into a power four corner. He ultimately did by the end of his prep career, landing at Syracuse. And I hate to bring up positional versatility again, because I feel like people are going to think it's my only talking point today. But I mean, he played safety during his first year at Syracuse. Corner's where he's going to be at Penn State. It's where he played last year at Syracuse, albeit sparingly. He played a bunch in the nickel, so he's played down around the line of scrimmage, and that's intriguing for a bigger kid at 6'3", around 200. But his length and his athleticism, definitely two main selling points for Penn State going after McDaniels. And look, this is a kid coming in with a chip on his shoulder. He wants to play at a power four level. He wants to prove he belongs, and he wants to go out and make plays for Penn State. So guys who come in hungry like that, I think that's a trait that this staff looks for. McDaniels fits that bill. And Terry Smith has had success in the past developing players of this ilk, the long athletic types who need a little bit more refinery. They get to him, they wind up putting together. I'm not saying McDaniels is going to become some star right off the bat, but he's got the tools to develop into a really nice piece for Penn State.
And to be honest, unlike safety, unlike tight end, you don't really have a need for freshmen to show up and push for an immediate large role at cornerback. Very different vibes in Terry Smith's cornerback room, and it's his 13th season as the cornerbacks coach now at Penn State, back in that role. Roster retention has been the storyline this offseason so far for that group. Davian Collins, a starter, is back. Darius Dixon, one of the premier freshmen on this roster last season, a guy who opened a lot of eyes during the final stretch of the year at cornerback. He is back on the roster. Zion Tracy, who's played more snaps combined than anybody in a Nittany Lions uniform, he's back on campus. Xavier Thomas, Joshua Johnson, Jameer Joseph, younger pieces of this group. Now Ivan McDaniels enters the conversation. We'll talk about the freshman impact too later in the show. Shifting focus from the defensive backfield over to the offensive line, where again, there's a lot of moving pieces right now for new position coach Ryan Clanton and new offensive coordinator Taylor Mauser. When you look at the addition of Texas State center Brock Riker, I think people who didn't dive into the details on this one will probably be quick to overlook it. But boy, Tyler, they may have found a multi-year starter at the center position for themselves. And this is a guy that, yes, at Texas State, a lower rung of the ladder in terms of college football competition, he had some serious sharks circling him in the waters in the transfer portal this year. You go back, you look at the tape, you watch how he graded out, how he handled himself as a young player, I believe a redshirt freshman starter at center last season. and you can really project some good things down the road here at Penn State. He'll face competition. Dominic Rulli started the Pinstripe Bowl with Nick Dawkins opted out. He's back for a reason. He wants to take a bigger role this year, but they have some significant competition now in the form of Riker.
Had programs like Alabama, Ole Miss, Miami, Texas. So we're talking about teams that made the college football playoff. And I mean, Miami's going to be playing for a national title here soon on Brock Riker. He was a freshman All-American. I believe it was The Athletic that anointed that title on him. And I think it's warranted. I mean, he graded out really, really well at Texas State. His lone year as a starter went overwhelmingly well. And that is what led to this influx of high-level Power 4 programs taking a look at him. Penn State fell into that category. Penn State pursued probably the most aggressively of the bunch. They were able to get Riker on campus pretty quickly after expressing, hey, look, we want you here. We want you as our center, short-term and long-term. We believe you had that kind of talent. And ultimately, once Riker made it to campus, Ryan Clanton, he helped to seal this one with his developmental track record, his plan for Riker's development in State College. It's one of my favorite gets of portal season. I mean, me and you talked about it over the weekend. I think this kid just has the goods to be a really key piece on the interior of Penn State's offensive line for multiple years. He's smart. That's important because, I mean, as center, you're the leader of the offensive line, right? You're responsible for the checks. You're responsible for all the switches and pass pro at the line. You are responsible for so many different things. These are all things Riker showed that he could handle in his lone year as the starting center at Texas State. So we got a question on the board right after Riker committed. By the way, Riker committed at like 12:22. I've never seen a portal guy commit that late. I decided midnight was when I could go to sleep and not miss his commitment. But
slacker. We got a slacker over here.
Oh, man, I'm the worst. But there was a question about, is he the depth at center? And one of our subscribers responded, I don't think he's the depth. And that is the correct response because Brock Riker's coming into play. He's not a depth piece. He's going to be an integral part of this Penn State offensive line in 2026.
And it'll be really interesting to see how fast he can get acclimated. I mean, we're talking about a new offensive line coach, a new offensive scheme. You got a few holdovers who played significant ball in the last couple of seasons, but there's a lot of change happening on the offensive front. So this is one of the most curious spots to look during spring practices in terms of where guys are playing, when guys are playing, what order are they repping in, and Ryan Clanton's going to have a lot to consider. And adding to that mix this year will be a Division II jumper. Offensive lineman Tyshawn Huff will make his move to Happy Valley. And this is a very under-the-radar guy, Tiffin College over in Ohio. I had not heard of them until we learned of this young man. And at this point, we continue to learn more about Huff. What can you share with us? Because I'd say when people reacted to this on social media, 50% of the responses I saw were like, oh my gosh, Matt Campbell's in trouble. Why is he reaching for a Division II player? And in my back of my head, I was like, y'all know Ole Miss's quarterback who just helped them get to a national semifinal was a Division II guy last year, right? I'm not saying he's going to take the Chambliss route and become one of the top players in his conference, but there's some compelling data points about Huff as he takes a significant jump in competition. Yeah,
before I get into Huff himself, two things. One, Tiffin. Shout out Chris Ivory, longtime NFL running back. Nate Washington, former Steelers receiver. Those guys are Tiffin procs. That's the only reason I knew about Tiffin, to be completely honest with you. If it wasn't for those two guys, I would have had no idea where this school is located or if it even existed. It's a pretty good D2 program, though, in my research, so credit to them. And the second point before diving into Huff as a player, there's this subset, it seems, of fans, at least on social media, who are like, oh, my God, we're taking this kid. Well, what a fall off here. I just want to remind people that Penn State went this route before with the previous coaching staff. Kid by the name of Alan Herron. He was a D2 offensive lineman, very, very raw. He wound up at Maryland in the end because he flipped to the Terps, and that's a whole different story. But Penn State has went this route before on the offensive line. So this isn't a product of the coaching change. It's something Penn State has done. But we've seen Matt Campbell and his staff get the best out of guys like this during their tenure at Iowa State. Huff is 6'5", around 300 pounds, I believe a tick over that. He's got a 7'3" wingspan. He's an agile, athletic kid. 11 starts this past season for Tiffin, allowed just 1 sack. The goal seems to be for him to play tackle But developmentally, if he's an interior guy, Penn State thinks he can move well enough to play on the interior, be an impactful force on the interior. It's a developmental take. There's no doubt about it, right? You've got to make the jump up from D2 to Big Ten. That's not easy. He's got a couple years of eligibility to work with. So that's something working in Huff's favor in this situation. We'll see where it goes. I mean, Penn State they need bodies, right? And you could either take bodies who just fill a spot, or you could take bodies who have upside and can develop into something for you, whether it be immediately or down the road. So file Huff away. Again, he might not be a guy in 26, but I think he'll have a chance to compete for a spot in that offensive line rotation. And come 2027, maybe we're talking about him a little bit more if he's able to put some things together.
Talking about potential developmental progress, a jump in competition, Keith Jones is quickly one of the more captivating people for me to track in this 2026 transfer class for Penn State. Jumping over to the wide receiver who came on board, I believe it was Monday that he announced, losing track of days again lately, Keith Jones Jr., initially out of Edna Carr High School in New Orleans, which if you don't follow recruiting, you probably don't know this, but Carr is one of the premier hotbeds for prospects. And you're talking about a big-time program that he's out of there. Basketball player, and I watched some of his highlights on the court yesterday as I was trying to kind of get a full scope of who this kid is. He was a hell of a basketball player down there. He was their best player, running a point guard at 6'4", blocking shots, draining threes, putting back rebounds for dunks, all sorts of stuff out there. He wasn't a highly regarded wide receiver outside of the top 100 nationally at his position, ends up landing at Grambling State. And all he did with the Tigers was quickly become one of their premier offensive players as a redshirt freshman last year. And you look at the highlights from last season, he's making contested catches. He's catching slants and then going 30 yards after the catch with them. Really a lot to like about his athletic prospect profile. I mentioned he's got that 6'4" frame. I believe he is over 200 pounds at this point. Now you get him inside of a power conference conditioning program, nutritional program. I don't know if he ends up being a star receiver at the Big Ten level, Tyler, but this is a guy that no one should be sneezing at when they talk about how the receiver group could play out in 2026, 2027, because this guy has a lot to work with. And it's not just we're not just talking about those developmental traits and the projection stuff here. He's got a sample size, albeit at a lower level of college football at Grambling, where you're seeing him make plays on a college football field.
Yeah, I mean, going from the SWAC to the Big Ten, it's kind of like Huff. It's not as big of a jump, but it's definitely still a jump. So there's going to be an adjustment period. But, I mean, he has the body type. Again, going back to what this staff has accomplished developmentally at Iowa State, we've seen Noah Pauley get some of these guys who are built like Jones Jr.'s and get them to become pretty productive wideouts. I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. I don't know if he's ever going to develop into a number one in a Big Ten offense, but I think he'd be a contributor for you. I think he's got some intriguing traits. The athleticism is there. The catch radius is there. So he could be a weapon for you on the outside because, look, I know this has probably become a foreign concept for some Penn State fans in recent years, but this staff is going to throw the ball vertically down the field. There is a such thing as called back shoulder fades that exists in Taylor Mauser's offense. I mean, Keith Jones Jr., 6'4", 185. I think he's closer to around like 195, 200 at this point. So really big kid, can go up and get it. He's kind of like Chase Sowell in that regard coming over from Iowa State. So it's clear that we used to talk about Phil Trauwein having a type on the offensive line. It's clear Noah Pauley has himself a little bit of a type at wide receiver, given some of the guys that Penn State has pursued in the portal so far this offseason. I don't know if that type is predicated on specific need at the position, so we'll see where Pauley takes things long-term in terms of recruiting at the position, body type, skill set type. What is Penn State going to target at wide receiver? But I think you're getting a sense here with guys like Jones Jr. But we'll see. I understand that some people have something of a trepidation about some of the guys who have been brought in. I know Grambling State, again, it's a SWAC program. It's not a powerful program. So there's a little bit of a lack of track record that comes with taking a guy like that in the portal. But look, talent is talent, right? The old adage, if you could play, they'll find you. And Penn State's hoping they found something to keep Jones Jr.
I shared this little anecdote a long time ago on the podcast. May have not been that long time ago, but I was evaluating a lot of film from Canada way back in the day for a different job that I had, and looking at talent across that country a little bit. And I was told, because it's difficult. The competition's very different when you're watching Canadian football field. I was told by a veteran, and I mean decades of experience at the power conference level as a coach, as an evaluator, as a recruiter. And he said, watch how they play. Don't focus on who they play. He said, it's very easy to get caught up in who they play. Watch how they play. And I think if you watch how Jones plays out there, at least what I saw a little bit on Monday, and again, I liked what I saw on the basketball court. I think there's some things that you can translate from that as well. But I like how he plays, generally speaking. And so we'll see what that looks like when he's sharing the football field with a bunch of guys who are also plus athletes who can get it done on the field. But that length is going to be tough for a lot of people in matchups, and that includes Penn State defensive backs. And we'll see if he can get it done first behind the scenes and then maybe earn himself some opportunities in Big Ten action in 2026. Now, Tyler, before we turn the page, receiver is a spot where it's always hyper-focused because of what has not happened there for Penn State. They have failed to take that step forward the last few cycles, despite adding transfer talent on a consistent basis. And when you look at what they've done so far, 5 transfer receivers, 4 of them from Iowa State, who we addressed earlier this month on the podcast. The 2 that we really need to be focused in on there are Chase Sowell and then Brett Eskelsen. Both of them accomplished quite a bit in Iowa State uniforms. Personally, I think Sowell could be, outside of Beck, the most impactful pickup for them from that Iowa State haul. We'll see, but I think he's a guy that really has a wide receiver 1 potential. When you look at this group, though, now that you add a 5th guy from a lower level of college football, do you get the sense that the job's just about finished in pursuing receivers out of the transfer portal, or that the newest staff, and specifically Noah Pauley, who has a really proven track record in developing talent at this spot, they're still doing their diligence?
There's probably a spot for one more at this point. They've hosted some receivers for visits. I'm not sure if there are going to be any additional visits for receiver targets in the portal, but there's room for one more. And you also have to keep in mind, it goes beyond the portal. They're working on Samson Gash in the high school recruiting ranks, the 4-star Michigan State receiver commit who's a Penn State legacy. They're pushing really hard to get that one done. And Gash told me he's going to be on campus for an official visit next weekend, not this upcoming weekend, next weekend, and then Michigan State.
And they were in his house.
Yes.
And they were in his, it was a Terry Smith, Noah Pauley, Mauser were all in Gash's house just a few days ago. So yeah, you're right.
They went in home with him Friday, and they made it clear exactly how wanted he is in State College. That's going to be a very interesting official visit. It's also interesting that Michigan State is going to get the last crack at Samson Gash before the February signing period rolls around. Spartan's going to host him for an official on January 31st. So we'll see where that one goes. But wide receiver now, it's a conversation that goes beyond the portal because they really want Sam Gash. There's no doubt about it.
And all of a sudden, that February signing day this year, a little more intrigue around it. As we've discussed, there's a little bit more significance to that this year. Tyler, will finish off the new additions. And by the time we finish recording and get this live, there could be yet another addition to this 2026 transfer class. But the latest is a special teams impact. Nathan Tice, an Australian punter. He's in his mid-20s at this point. He comes up from Mississippi State. He's a guy that as we have gathered through some research the last couple of days, spent time working on a farm in Australia, is one of those really interesting stories and backgrounds that we're going to have to dive into once he's on campus and hopefully have a conversation with him. But here he is, and he could be a solution because not only did Penn State lose their former starting punter who was benched last year in Riley Thompson, his job ended up just being the holder as a senior, but Gabe Wosu, who took that job, he is moving on. He's going to try to find a spot on an NFL roster. So punter is a spot where you want to have that one figured out. You've got special teams coordinator Justin Lustig staying on campus, and he could be that solution in 2026.
He could. I think, I feel like all these punters that come in nowadays in college football have like these insane backstories, and he fits that profile perfectly. Another thing I want to point out about the 2 punters Penn State has coming in, because there's also Lucas Tenbrock from the high school ranks. Tice is 6'5", was it 230? Tenbrock is 6'6", around, it's up there in the 200s. So these are 2 really big kids coming in, and they've got big legs for Penn State as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see Justin Lustig work with this group as a special teams coordinator. Keeping Justin Lustig was a really big deal that I think flew under the radar a bit. I'm sure you guys dove into it a bunch more than me and you have, but that was a really big keep for Penn State because he does a lot of little things too behind the scenes beyond just his work as special teams coordinator that does not go unnoticed inside of Lash. And I think he's got 2 punters coming in, Nathan Tice and Lucas Tenbrock, that he could get a lot out of. So it seems like Penn State has its answer at the position one way or another in 2026. But this is going to be a battle that unfolds. It's going to be one of the more under the radar battles to watch, but it sure is going to be an intriguing one and an important one at that, because you want to maintain, you want to win the field position battle. God, I can't talk today. Field position battle as often as you can. These guys can flip the field for you, and I think Tyson's a pretty strong ad. I know he was beat out towards the end at Mississippi State. Mississippi State, I mean, they had an all-American punter, I believe, this past year. So don't sleep on Nathan Tyson's ability. He can come in and make I think, a high level of impact for Penn State on special teams.
And you mentioned the freshman coming in. He was at an All-American event last week. So you're bringing in a high-level high school recruit as well in Tenbrook to compete for this job, which will be important. You only notice that punter's a problem for you when it becomes a problem, and typically you just ignore it because things are just going well and you just want to get to the defense. But if it's not right, it can be very glaring for you. And so we'll see if one of these guys can be the solution. And they both may be big, but neither are Gabe Nwosu big, who was routinely he was often mistaken as a nose tackle wearing number 99 and pushing toward 300 pounds during pregame warmups. And Tyler, who are some names that we should know moving forward to monitor in terms of Penn State, maybe pushing towards that 40-player mark and roster acquisitions so far in the postseason transfer portal window? Are there some names you want to throw out there? Maybe call your shot right now. You've been really good at giving us some nuggets, and then within a day or two, they've been in the class. So anyone else to kind of mention?
It's kind of difficult to say right now because they're exploring depth adds at certain positions. I know defensive end, edge rusher, that's a spot where they want to add. Akene Ezogu from Iowa State's a guy who's come up in conversation. But the thing with him is, I mean, he's a little bit bigger. So does he fit in this system as a defensive end, as a bigger piece at the position? That's something I think is still being figured out. But D-end, edge rusher, however you want to put it, that's something that the staff is still looking at in the portal. I mean, beyond that, to be completely honest with you, I mean, they're looking for a veteran quarterback if they could swing one. Because, look, as high as they are on Alex Mansky and this freshman group coming in, it would still benefit from having a little bit more of an experienced backup in the room for Rocco Beck, maybe a guy from the FCS ranks, Group of 5 ranks, who is just understanding of what his role would be at a program like Penn State. We've seen Group of 5 guys and FCS guys, high-level G5 and FCS guys at that, assume roles like this at a higher-level Power 4 program. So that's something that Penn State is exploring. I mentioned wide receiver. O-line, they're still looking. There are a couple pieces out there that I'm not quite sure fit, but it is something that they're exploring right now because, again, they're not going to force fit, right, at this juncture. They have enough on the offensive line where they can approach it and say, hey, look, is this guy 100% what we want at the position? That's something that's being evaluated behind the scenes. Corner, I mentioned, that looks like a position where it's good. Safety, they look like they're in a good spot. Linebacker seems to be in a pretty good spot right now. So I know that a lot of people are kind of centered on that 40 number. Is Penn State going to get there? Or they're not going to get there? I'm not sure how much more portal movement I'm necessarily anticipating in speaking with sources. Now, it's Tuesday. You know, if a position coach falls upon a guy in the portal and decides he wants him and wants to bring him in, that's something Penn State's definitely going to explore. So this narrative and dialogue could change by the end of the week. But right now, it's a little bit quieter than I was anticipating it would be.
Now, the portal will close on the 16th, so this is the last week of it, but doesn't mean you can't – I mean, some people I think are like you have to have everybody signed by this. Like the portal just means you're in there. You're open to explore, and from there you can take really as long as you need. There's going to be guys searching for homes, and there's going to be guys not finding homes. I mean, unfortunately, that's a reality of this new era of college football. There are hundreds potentially of players who enter the transfer portal thinking it was the right move to give them a chance to elevate their career, and they're not going to have a spot at Division I football when this game of musical chairs ends. That's just the reality of it. There's too many guys in the portal. There's only so many roster spots. So we will keep tabs of this thing, but again, it won't end just because the portal closes. That just means that no one is entering the portal anymore. But if you are already inside of that portal, you can be pursued by anyone across the country for the next days, weeks, months, however long it takes to figure things out and get you on a roster. And so I just wanted to put that out there just to clarify things a bit in case people have some questions on that one. Tyler, in terms of roster retention updates, we've got to discuss a bit of a shuffle in the running back room. Last time we spoke with folks on Friday, you had Cam Wallace leaving, Tyke Hayes staying. Well, you can reverse that now. Tyke Hayes has hit the transfer portal. Cam Wallace is back in the mix. Both of them reversed course. Our understanding of this situation is that Tyke Hayes was leaving before Cam Wallace was coming back. And so that's our understanding of kind of how things worked out from a time perspective here. But no disrespect to Cam Wallace, who's going to be a redshirt junior, a guy who we've seen do some good things in games. Didn't play at all on offense in Big Ten action. He had a nice moment in his return to the field from an injury in the opener against Nevada where he hurdled somebody. He entered the 2024 season as RB3 before suffering a very serious lower body injury last September of 2024. There's just a bit of a checkered injury thing there. We haven't seen a lot. He's in year 4 on a college campus. To me, I was a little more excited personally about Tyke Hayes and maybe his role on this team moving forward, maybe his value here in Happy Valley as someone who was only going to be a redshirt freshman. He got involved in the Pinstripe Bowl. We did not see Cam Wallace get any touches in the Pinstripe Bowl. And so with Hayes, and he's a guy that I think we were both generally fans of when he got to campus, and especially after seeing him get some of that momentum in spring ball. He is hitting the portal. He is in the portal. Wallace is back. And so just to kind of reshuffle things for folks out there, your retained running backs now are Cam Wallace and then redshirt sophomore Quentin Martin Jr., who was kind of the standout in that Pinstripe Bowl, 101 rushing yards. And then you've got these transfer pieces who are entering the mix now, in Carson Hansen from Iowa State and James Peoples from Ohio State. And you've got Deontay Sheffy, who has joined this class as an incoming freshman. And we'll talk about him in a bit. I may be missing somebody in that conversation. I may not be, but that's where things stand now, Tyler. And then Anai White is back into the portal. He's a guy who spent 1 year with Penn State, former top 50 prospect out of Philadelphia, started his college football career at Texas A&M, dealt with a serious knee injury that limited his second and third seasons with the Aggies. He entered the portal after that, came here to Happy Valley, played a career-high 8 games this season, but he did not surpass 8 snaps in any of Penn State's Big Ten games. He was truly a reserve piece on the defensive line, came here as a defensive end, ended up transitioning to defensive tackle. Then we saw him get some reps at defensive end late in Big Ten when it was all said and done. Not sure where his positional future lies. He's listed at 6'5", 280 pounds, but he is moving on. I don't think that's a huge impact necessarily on on-field plans in 2026, but that's just someone to remove from the equation. And then a couple of names I want to throw your way here, Tyler. Young defenders who have announced that they are staying with the Nittany Lions. And on the surface, it might not seem like much, but I think both could be significant pieces for the two deep. And then you look at toward 2027 and what they might mean if they're still around then for this defense, because you need pieces that are evolving, maturing, getting better behind the scenes a bit. They could be two of them. Cam Smith at linebacker, going to be a redshirt freshman. And then Deshaun Burnett, also a redshirt freshman, a guy who is kind of a quasi hybrid linebacker edge rusher coming out of high school. And I think he could fit some of that versatility that Danton Lynn wants to accomplish as defensive coordinator with what he does from a personnel perspective. So I wanted to get your thoughts on Smith, who made 1 game appearance briefly against UCLA, and then Burnett, an edge rusher.
So Smith kind of goes against this build of Iowa State linebacker that Penn State has brought in the portal, but he offers a different skill set with his athleticism and his ability to cover. So I think that appeals to this new Penn State staff, Danton Lynn. I think that skill set plays in his defense. So we'll see where Cam Smith goes in his progression. I think Deshaun Burnett is something of an underrated keep. I still think that he's learning the nuances of being a full-time edge rusher after coming over from Amani Christian in Pittsburgh area where he did so much for them, played so many different positions. I think he's still physically and skill set wise coming into his own. So from my perspective, I think that's something of an underrated keep, and that's a guy Penn State wants to keep around. So I'd say 2 solid wins on the retention front, 2 young guys who, I mean, it's a flip of the coin if they're going to get to where they need to be, but the staff's going to take their crack at developing these guys.
The news on Smith is good because you lost both of your linebackers from the 2024 recruiting class. That was Anthony Specca. That was Kari Jackson. Neither of them did much on the field for Penn State during their 2 years on campus. Now they're elsewhere, moving on in the transfer portal. And so that 2025 linebacker class, just from, a depth and developmental standpoint, going to be key for you. And right now it looks like all 3 of those guys will be here. Alex Tash, a couple weeks ago announced he was sticking with Penn State. Now we hear it from Cam Smith. And then LeVar Arrington II, we haven't heard anything publicly from him that he's staying, but they re-updated the roster a couple of days ago. He remains on the roster. We know his ties to Happy Valley through his father. And so at this stage, it looks like they'll have a trio to work with there. And all three of them have specifically starkly different traits, I think, that they can use for this defensive staff. Tyler, just talking about roster retention as I work through some recent developments, there's been quite a movement from State College to Knoxville. It started with Jim Knowles. It continued with Anthony Poindexter, 2 members of the 2025 staff here at Penn State. And they have gone fishing for some significant starting talent here from Penn State's roster. They have brought in Amari Campbell at middle linebacker. They have brought in defensive end Chaz Coleman, who was very much prized in the transfer portal, visited LSU, visited Ohio State, ends up with Tennessee. They get Xavier Gilliam, who started the Pinstripe Bowl for Penn State at defensive tackle, was number 2 on DT reps behind Zane Durant in the 2025 season. And they add Dejon Lane at safety, who has a chance to start for the Volunteers after playing about 60-plus snaps in the Pinstripe Bowl for Penn State. So interestingly enough, when you look at game snaps accrued through the 2025 season, Tennessee's getting a lot more of those game snaps at this point than Virginia Tech is. Virginia Tech and James Franklin are really picking off the bottom rungs of this team. And that doesn't mean the worst players, but they're picking off the bottom rungs of the depth chart in terms of developmental guys. The latest that have gone to Virginia Tech include Michael Troutman, who was a freshman center last year for Penn State, Malachi Williams and Cortez Harris, who were both freshman edge rushers for Penn State last year. That kind of falls in line with what they've done and acquiring some talent. Keon Wiley's a bit of a different player that they've added down there at Virginia Tech, as he's going to be a redshirt senior. He's played significant football in the Big Ten for Penn State. And then Luke Reynolds was finally announced as signing with Virginia Tech on Monday. We know that he started a bunch of games at tight end. We still expect Ethan Grunkemeyer to be eventually announced. Whenever that happens, I don't know. I know they're waiting impatiently in Blacksburg for an announcement there, but we're expecting Grunkemeyer to end up at Virginia Tech. But those are the 2 schools right now when you look at where the bulk of this outward class is going from Penn State. Virginia Tech, as we expected, but then Tennessee has also popped up as a major player. And then just a few other notes here as guys have found other landing spots before we get to the freshman class, and some other notes. A.J. Harris to Indiana, so he's going to join the Big Ten champions after starting back-to-back seasons at cornerback for Penn State. I mentioned earlier safety Antoine Belgrave-Shorter off to Arizona State. I also mentioned earlier Andrew Olish, one of the top tight ends in the 2025 class. He's going to Oregon. Oregon was very much in the mix for him last year when he ultimately picked Penn State and flipped from Michigan. Javen Williams, a former 5-star offensive lineman from the in-state pickup for Penn State a few years back. He'll continue his career at a lower level playing for Charlotte. And then Matt Outen to Syracuse, a bit of a surprise there. A lot of people connected him to Virginia Tech. He's a former Hokies commit. He's a Virginia native. He was recruited by James Franklin of Penn State. Instead, he's up to Syracuse. And Jackson Smolik, one of the quarterback departures. I talked about Ethan Grunkemeyer, expected at Virginia Tech. Beckham Kritza is out there. And then you've got Jackson Smolik going to Temple, so staying in the state of Pennsylvania, heading to Philadelphia, among a few guys who have found a home at Temple, along with tight end Joey Schlaffer on that offensive side of the ball for the Owls. And so we'll move past that. I know those aren't the fun parts that people like to hear about, but we've got to report upon that too and discuss that, where these Penn State players are ultimately landing. Tyler, you had a story up on Tuesday before we shift gears to this freshman class that just got to campus, and it focused on the impact from the portal on this defense and what it might mean moving forward for the Nittany Lions, for their new defensive coordinator, for the new position coaches, and even for Terry Smith, that cornerbacks coach. What can you share with us from your latest edition of Tyler's Tidbit? Let me say it right. Tyler's Tidbits over at Lions247.com.
Oh, man, it looks like neither of us can talk today. We're on the same page. I love it. But it's just really analyzing the mix of veteran talent that's come in and the young talent that has come in. Defensive tackle, that took up a lot of the article. Just the overall pursuits on the defensive line, bringing in the 2 veteran D tackles from UCLA, and then the mix of the younger guys at the position. So it's a very interesting group that is coming together for Penn State in the portal. And honestly, a lot of it kind of outlined what we got into with the linebacker and safety conversations, because there was a lot of talk about Jeremiah Cooper, Chris Filippo, those guys coming over, even McDaniels coming over from Syracuse. So a lot of what we've talked about here this morning is carryover from that article. So if you want to check it out, check it out. I personally recommend it. I like to think it's a good read, but there's not a part in the article that I think fails to realize that some of these guys need to come together developmentally. Not all of these guys are ready-made, sure things, because the fact of the matter is those players, quite frankly, they just don't exist in the portal. There's always an element of, well, the guy has to do this to get to where he needs to be. Guys like Marcus Neal, they profile as high-level contributors for sure, but they still have to get acclimated in a new system and a new scheme. It helps that they're coming over and joining a staff that they already know very, very well, and they know their position coach very, very well. But how does that translate in a new system, in a new conference, in a new place? So I just went about analyzing the good of it all and the potential bad of it all, because you got to look at it on both sides.
All right, Tyler, let's talk about these newcomers to campus in the freshman class. And this is a group that came together pretty quickly, very heavy on former Cyclone signees who reshuffled their plans and said, I'm coming with Matt Campbell. I'll be right there at State College. And now they are here, many of them in classes, in team facilities now at this point. And let's begin in the defensive backfield, because earlier we talked about how there's a bit of a juxtaposition where safety has all these new transfer players. Cornerback is largely built up of retained roster talent, but both of them will get an influx of freshmen. Bryson Williams, you've got Tyrell Chapman, two guys that we've talked about here in the past on the podcast, Amarian Jackson, and then Josiah Zayas, who I know has a little bit of versatility. You can maybe break that down for us. But what do we need to know about that quartet of freshman arrivals who could impact plans in the secondary?
Yeah, so Zayas is an interesting one because he signed to play cornerback at Iowa State, but there's the potential for him to play receiver at Penn State. So I think that's a really interesting one. He's a talented kid, and he
can I tell you the last guy we heard about that in that regard? Do you remember the last guy we heard who was signed at cornerback, but was discussed at wide receiver? And even after he signed, they were saying, we still are discussing him at wide receiver. Do you remember who it was? Zion Tracy. And obviously he has stuck on defense, but he's become a bit of a mainstay for this team on defense over the years.
Yep. No, that's a really good point. I think the only difference between these two kids is Zion Tracy. We remember from the camp circuit how his testing numbers were. I don't know what Josiah Zayas' testing numbers are, but I do know the film shows a pretty good football player. So wherever he lands, we'll see. Ultimately, he's going to have every chance to slot in at either spot. He's a good developmental piece in this class. I know he's one of the favorite members of the Iowa State class for a lot of people internally. So that's one to keep an eye on. Tyrell Chapman, he's going to slot in at corner. Really like him. I've talked about him a bunch. His testing numbers, elite speed, quickness, good, I think, coming into his own as a cover corner. Solid kid, smart kid. So he's a nice addition at that position room for Terry Smith. And then on the back end of the secondary, you've got Amarian Jackson, who was kind of like Zayas, but flipped. He was signed to play wide receiver at Iowa State, but he was one of the better two-way players in Nebraska at Millard South. He was a really good DB for Millard South. He's going to get a crack at playing safety first under Deion Broomfield's watch. And then Bryson Williams, who's also from that Omaha area in Nebraska, played at Westside High. Long kid, 6'4", 180. He's got to get in the weight room. He's going to do it at Penn State, but long, tantalizing potential at safety. So that is the quartet coming in the secondary among this group of early enrollees, and it's an encouraging group. And again, we'll see where Zayas ultimately lands. A couple months from now, he might not even be part of the conversation in the secondary. I should also mention the most recent commit in the class, Christian Askew, safety from Georgia, cornerback safety. That's what they're saying. He's like 6'4", 205. So we'll see where Mother Nature ultimately takes him. In the end, there's going to be some things that might not be able to be controlled there. But he's expected as an early enrollee as well. They're in the process of figuring everything out with the spring semester underway. So he could factor into that group when it's all said and done as well.
So Askew is one of two former JMU signees in this class, correct? And we'll get to the other one in a second. But so you've got as many guys in this class who signed with JMU in early December as you have guys who signed with Penn State in early December. Crazy. And then you've got a bunch of these Iowa State guys tacked on top of it. It is very strange to consider. But let's talk about the other JMU commit. And look, a couple of years ago, if you talk about JMU, 4 or 5 years ago, you're like, who, what, where? people know JMU now, I would imagine,
Yeah.
considering what Kurt Signetti did there, considering what they accomplished this year, getting the playoffs. So they may not be in the power conference level, but they have certainly shown their ability to develop winning programs and recruit at a really solid clip and get talent on campus. And so the other guy to know from that group is Ben Whitver, who I think you and I both felt very good about as a prospect. When Penn State was kind of looking at him earlier in the process, we got to look at him in some camp action. I've seen some highlight film. He's always someone who from a distance has interested me. Now that he is in front of our face and quite frankly, a few miles away from where I'm recording this podcast in class or at the facility or somewhere, pay attention to him. I'll be paying attention to him. I think we've laid it out pretty good that when you add the receiver talent that has accomplished some things in the college football field, 2 of them from Iowa State, 1 of them from Grambling. You've got Kobe Howard back. You've got some pieces that you like, and I don't think there's a real urgency to see a freshman break through in year 1. I don't know that Whitver would be that guy anyways, but I really like the sharpness to his ability as a wide receiver. This is not any kind of athlete that you have to try to turn into a position player. I think he is already pretty polished at the position coming to the college level, which leads me to believe that the next step in the process for him is the weight room, the nutrition stuff, and trying to become the most impressive athletic specimen he can become to kind of match that with the traits I already see at receiver.
Yeah, he arrives at Penn State with a refinery to his game. He's just one of those kids who goes out and makes plays. That's what he did throughout his prep career in Virginia. He's the VHSL's all-time receiving leader in yards, 3rd all-time in reception. So he's prolific. He's refined. Again, he's never going to maybe jump off the page testing-wise, but he did test well. He's a 4.4 40 kid, and he was someone Penn State is very excited to add to this class at wide receiver. Because, again, sure hands, good route runner, encouraging quick short area quickness. So there's a lot to like with Ben Whitver for sure.
There's a variety of offensive linemen that'll be in this freshman class, and some of them from Iowa State, one of them making the move early on, Mason Bandhauer. We discussed the transfer portal pickups there and how they could impact things. With Bandhauer, who was obviously committed by this current staff when they were at Iowa State, there's a history there. They liked him for a variety of reasons. What have you heard about why he was one of those carryover commits that they decided they wanted to pursue now that they were in Penn State? And what does his role look like from a positional standpoint as far as you've gathered thus far?
Strong, tough kid. I think he's going to get a start out at tackle. I think that's where they like him the most right now. He's around 6'5", pushing 300. So he's got the frame for it. And again, just an under-the-radar kid in that class. Didn't generate necessarily a ton of headlines throughout his prep career, but Iowa State loved its evaluation. We've got him as a high 3-star recruit, a guy who's kind of close to 4-star status, depending on how you look at it. So I think there's a lot to like with Mason Bandhauer, and he arrived on campus as one of the early enrollees, and he'll get to work with Ryan Clanton. I think getting him in town early definitely helps his development.
And then you want to talk about a position room reset. Let me interest you in the quarterback spot for Penn State. All 4 scholarship guys from the 2025 roster, no longer with the Nittany Lions. Drew Aller going to take his shot at the NFL. Ethan Grunkemeyer, as we said, probably headed to Virginia Tech. And then you've got Jackson Smollett going to Temple. Peyton Falzone, Beckham Kritza out and about looking for his next home. And that leads me to Peyton Falzone because he is one of 2 incoming, well, now they are here, quarterbacks in the freshman class, along with Case Evans. Falzone committed to Penn State, committed to Auburn, committed to Virginia Tech as a high school player, ultimately circled back with a second commitment to Penn State, which occurred on signing day as he signed. At that stage, they did not have a full-time head coach on board. They were still operating under the management of Terry Smith when Peyton Falzone signed about a month and a half ago at this stage. And then the other quarterback in Case Evans was a commit for Iowa State, ultimately a signee for Iowa State. And he was somebody that I heard from the recruiting world, there was a lot of love for what Iowa State was able to do in bringing him up from Texas. There was a lot of people who felt like this was going to be another strong recruiting win for the Cyclones and kind of a sleeper move for them when you look at the position overall across the country. Instead, he's coming to Penn State. So a 2-man class at quarterback. They're going to join a group that is going to include a couple of former Iowa State quarterbacks and projected starter Rocco Becht. And then you've got the younger player, and remind me of his name, Tyler Mansky.
Yes, Alex Mansky.
Alex Mansky's the redshirt freshman who has a lot of potential there as well. So a lot of Iowa State feel here. And then you've got Peyton Falzone, who's kind of in his own bucket as this developmental piece that we've seen in a ton of camps, and we've brought it to the podcast plenty. He is not there right now as a passer. He could get there. He is certainly power conference level as an athlete. I think he's a guy who has that attitude and behavior around him that people gravitate toward. Could be the leader of a huddle, could be the leader of a locker room down the road. But we have questions about where he's going to land as a quarterback and being efficient and accurate and precise downfield with passes. And so a lot to look at with Peyton Falzone, and maybe a little less in that department with Case Evans. Tell us where you stand on these two.
Well, it's refinery versus potential. I think Evans is the refined one of the group, coming over from Texas. He was one of the more productive senior quarterbacks in Lone Star State this past fall. So that's encouraging because it's not easy to produce at that level in Texas. And Falzone, he has all of the athletic gifts you could possibly ask for at the quarterback position. He just has to continue to improve mechanically, improve with his accuracy. And that's something he's going to work pretty hard at. We know that about Peyton Falzone. He's very excited to get to work with Jake Waters, get to work with Trace McSorley. So he's going to do what he has to do. But there's definitely a difference between the two in terms of level of passer. Right now, Evans is more advanced. He's more refined mechanically. He's more where you would probably expect a high school quarterback to be, a Power 4 high school quarterback prospect to be in his development as a passer. But again, Peyton Falzone has all the physical tools you could possibly ask for. It's just a matter of him putting it together developmentally.
There have been some rumblings about Penn State exploring another transfer pickup at quarterback. Maybe a guy who's been around college football a while would maybe be accepting of a backup role to kind of fortify your depth. I don't know if that happens. That's a tough sell for a lot of quarterbacks in the transfer portal who want to play, who want to put film out there. But I do know that as things stand now, one of these freshmen will have to be your quarterback 3 unless there is an addition, or at least competing to be quarterback 3. And that job comes with a lot. Comes with significant reps on the practice field with the primary offense, and it comes with travel time. You get to go on the road, be with the team on the travel roster. So kind of a competition to watch there between Falzone and Evans, and that will really start in earnest on the practice field in March as spring practices get underway. But between now and then, a lot can be accomplished in the weight room, in the film room with this staff, and something to track there too beyond the transfers they've added in that room. One more name to get to from the early enrollee collection, Tyler, and it's a guy that we covered quite a bit last week on the show, so we don't have to go too long on this one, but Deontay Sheffy. No one had an easier move to campus than the State College High School standout, coming off a senior season where he surpassed 1,600 rushing yards, 10 games over 100 yards, nearly 30 total touchdowns on the season, about 7 yards average per carry. And he's been on everybody's radar here locally since his freshman year, when I think he was at around 1,700 rushing yards going back to year one at the high school level. Never got that offer from Penn State's former staff. They got a lot of looks at him, prospect camps, locally, what have you. Was committed to Syracuse. He ends up, though, joining this new plan at Penn State, a late scholarship offer, a late commit, and he ultimately is quickly on campus. Again, he's a guy who doesn't have to pack much. He can probably have just pop over to home and grab whatever he needs anytime. But he makes this move, and it was all so quick. I just want to remind folks out there, Tyler, that Sheffy was not somebody that we forecasted to be in this class until, 2 weeks ago? And now here he is with a shot to carry the football. We've talked about who's left that room. I don't think he's going to get a lot of game looks here in 2026 because of what we've mentioned, bringing in transfer players. There's other competition from roster retention that's there. He should have an opportunity to really advance physically, which is going to be the most important thing for his process, and then get into 2027 as a guy who's maybe ready to climb a few rungs in the depth chart, because at that point, you're going to have more changes. And so this is somebody I think we kind of put in the back burner a little bit for 2026, but nonetheless could be an important piece for this position room long-term.
Yeah, no doubt. You file him away and you see where he's at developmentally in a year or two, because the production at State College High was pretty solid. It was encouraging. He was a Power 4 commit for a long time, commit to Syracuse before things changed in November. And now he's on board at Penn State. So it'll be an interesting developmental project for Savon Huggins early in his tenure, as Penn State's running backs coach.
Yeah, it'll be fun to follow. A lot more on Sheffy last week, a lot more on Sheffy on the site. Tyler has some commit analysis from 5-6 days ago. I have highlight tape up there where you can watch the film from Sheffy, and a little more commentary over at Lions247.com on that pickup, and a lot more coming to you at lions247.com as we put together the pieces. We got Mark Brennan consistently updating our projected roster, changing day by day, as you know by now. We've got Daniel Gallen doing a great job tracking who's leaving, who's staying, who's coming in, all of that over at lions247.com. And of course, Tyler Calvaruso bringing you minute by minute updates from the recruiting trail and transfer portal as things progress. Next episode of this podcast, I want to put out a bit of a tease because I think it'll be worth your time to listen or watch. We're going to have somebody from Ames, Iowa, one of the beat reporters who's covered these Cyclones, hop on with us and talk about all these players that are coming in from Iowa State. He has covered them on the practice field, in game action. He's seen the best of them. He has seen the worst of them at times over the course of his days covering this group. So we'll find out what he can pass along to us about a bunch of potential Penn State playmakers here in 2026. That'll be on the next episode of the podcast. Tyler, between now and whenever we get you back on, and odds are it'll be pretty soon, anything you want to encourage our viewers or listeners to check out on the site?
Just stay tuned with our portal and recruiting coverage at this point. I mean, there's going to be more visitors this weekend, and they're going to look to continue adding. And you've got junior days right around the corner as well. So you're going to see a bunch of 2027 targets locking in their visits. So definitely a lot to stay in tune with over on our end.
Yeah, full speed ahead. We're still about 2 months away from getting back on the field with this team for practice work, but there is a lot to be done here in Happy Valley for a new staff, a new look roster, and we're going to do our best step by step of the way over at lions247.com to keep you informed. 50% off deal right now still in place to jump on board, half off subscription price for a full calendar year. So that'll take you through the entire 2026 season. Tyler, great stuff from you as always. Really appreciate your perspective. For now, I am Tyler Donahue stepping aside. Thanks to everyone for watching or listening to the Lions 24/7 podcast.